Good evening, friends, and welcome to the online special lecture on lockdown effect on rural India. This special lecture is organized by the Loyola Institute for Social Science, Training and Research, LISSTAR, and by the Department of Sociology. And the speaker for the day is our own distinguished alumnus, P.Sainath, author, journalist, Raman Magsaysay awardee, founder editor of the People's Archive of Rural India, PARI. The format is going to be this. For the principal, will be introducing the speaker and the theme. It will be followed by Sainath speaking to us. More than 1,200 have registered, drawn from different parts of India, from all the research institutions, universities, central universities, and state universities. All of you will be watching in the YouTube, so you have a chat box. And whatever questions and comments you have, please write. And we have a team to work on this. They will be collating, they will be collecting all your questions and comments. And that will be placed before the speaker after 45 minutes. Sainath will be taking about 40-45 minutes, and after that we will place him the questions and the comments from the participants. And once when that session gets over, we will end the special lecture. May I now invite Reverend Dr. Thomas, Principal of the College and Director of the LISSTAR, to introduce the theme and the speaker. Over to Father Thomas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard. Good evening, my friends, and welcome to this evening webinar to reflect and deliberate on lockdown effect on rural India. It's my joy and privilege to welcome the speaker of the day, Mr. C.P. Sainath, a well-known, familiar personality, the right person to reflect the voice of rural India. We are really fortunate to have him with us this evening. And my dear friends from all over the subcontinent as well as across the globe, thanks for joining. Sure, it is an important theme that all of us we need to reflect. And to facilitate this reflection process, we have Mr. P. Sainath with us. It is true, worldwide, there is a retreat of the rural. In India, which has a larger rural population than even China, staggering changes have occurred, or still occurring in the countryside. And these changes have impacted the life system, the ecosystem of the entire rural India. We all know that rural India is also perhaps the most complex part of our planet, with 833 million of people, according to Census 2011, speaking at least 780 living languages, using 86 different scripts, phenomenal diversity. And apart from the gloomy picture most of us have of the rural India, it has a rich repository of wealth, knowledge, beauty, and skills and resources. I think Mr. Sainath has tried his best to present before us this picture vividly in front of us. I'm sure this today also he will be presenting before us. I think as human beings, apart from our own academic or other backgrounds, as human beings, we need to reflect on this part of the human being, especially this 3.5 months of lockdown. It has thrown off even huge industries, corporate houses, in an uncertain situation. So imagine the plight of rural people, and that's what we all are called, invited to reflect and see what we can do together. So I welcome all of you for this important discussion and deliberation. Thanks for joining once again. My dear friends, Mr. P.Sainath does not require introduction. All of us are familiar. His writings speak much more than he himself. His contribution to journalism, his contribution to farmers' crisis in India, his contribution to rural India is phenomenal. As Dr. Bernard Desami said, he is the Magsaysay Prize winner, and all through his life, he has focused on socio-economic, deprivation and inequality, poverty, particularly in rural India. Although he has received more than 50 national and global awards for journalism, I think it must be underlined, he has also declined quite a few awards and recognitions. It's pertinent to underline today again, according to him, Mr. P.Sainath, a journalist should never accept prizes and rewards from the governments they cover and critique. I think one sentence which we need to ponder for days together. A journalist should never accept prizes and rewards from the governments they cover and critique. Sainath was a McGrath Professor of Writing at Princeton University in fall 2012 and has been conferred doctorates by 2 other universities. In India, he has taught journalism for more than 30 years. His book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, was declared a Penguin Classic in 2013, is in its 50th printing. And much more important, all the royalties of this bestseller go to the journalists who cover rural India reports, and the money is shared for these people. What a symbolic gesture, the way he supports journalists who cover rural India. He's a journalist from 1980, and he became a full-time rural reporter in 1993 and has since then spent on an average around 270 days in a year in India's poorest regions, writing from there for India's largest newspapers, including Times of India and Hindu. I think this is where he's able to grasp the pulse of the rural people and smell rural people and bring out life and blood and flesh and emotion, the reality of rural India to us, each one of us. This is what every word, every phrase, every picture he presents before us speaks volumes. He almost brings the beat of rural India by his words and pictures. So we are really fortunate to have him today. And since 2014, the launch of PARI, a unique online project on rural India, he is able to capture, the stories, occupations, arts, music, culture, and a lot more through this. PARI is a contemporary journal, a digital textbook for the young people, which publishes in 12 Indian languages. It's a totally independent multimedia digital platform, creating a unique database, only one of its kind, that can lay claim to journalism representative of every region and section of rural people in this incredible, diverse nation. In the last 36 months, not yet 5 years old, this PARI has won 19 journalism awards, including every single major prize in that field in India. Those include the Ramnath Goenka Prize, the Statesman Rural Reporting Prize, a Ladli Award, a Redding Award, and many more. This is also one important thing is, of course, the awards for this Rural People's Archive has got quite a huge list. Instead, what I would like to tell you today is that how it connects the younger generation to the rural reality. Well, the younger generation may have reservation to go to rural India, but this virtual platform provides a huge link for connecting young people to rural reality, and really it's a wonderful initiative which is very essential for today's younger population, the digital generation. So, my dear friends, such a huge contribution to rural people, rural community, the issues affecting rural people. Sure, this 45 1 hour minutes of his presentation and our lively interaction is going to really put us in the right perspective to understand the reality in rural India, and as academicians and development people, what we can do together, we can reflect on it. So I hand over the floor to Mr. P.Sainath. Over to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father. I'm very delighted to be here, delighted to join you on this platform. We are closing in on about 120 days under the lockdown, right? So let's look into the lockdown mirror. And I ask all of you to reflect on what this particular example I give you tells us about ourselves as a society. As of July 14, there are 82 million tons of food grain in the stocks of the government of India. These are called variously a surplus, our food grain surplus or buffer stock. I prefer to call them the buffer stock or the government stock because I do not agree that they constitute a surplus. A surplus is something that, say, in your family, in your household, your kitchen, let's say you have a 5 or 6 member family. When all of you have eaten your fair share, your required food, what's left over, that is the excess or surplus. But in the 1.3 billion people, there are hundreds of millions who go to bed hungry every night. So I don't think that that stock represents a surplus. It doesn't represent a surplus of food. It represents a surplus of hunger. But here's the point. 82 million tons piled up in the government's godowns and also mostly on open yards because we do not have the godown space to keep that much grain. We have 82 million tons of food grain piled up and half the world's hungry people, the largest number of absolutely hungry people in the planet, and a population that is today facing greater hunger than it ever has in the past 50 years, with 82 million tons of food grain in the stocks in the buffer. It is just baffling the moral dimension of this kind of economics or planning or administration is completely baffling. A very minimal amount, 5 kilograms per person, has been distributed by the government. Then they made another announcement that they are going to distribute again, extend for a month, 2 months, 5 kilograms per person. And that this would reach everybody. Who is everybody? Those covered by the National Food Security Act, which, by the way, excludes about a third of your population. About 30% are not covered by it. Then a next announcement came, we are going to cover 30 million people who don't have, because of the criticism against this, we are going to cover 30 million people who don't have ration cards. Now, that was truly wonderful because those are the very 30 million people whose ration cards you cancelled in the last 3 years as being not deserving. Yeah. Let me try and tell you what 82 million tons of food grain is. And by the way, after all this distribution, you're coming to 82 million tons because on 1st of June, you had 104 million tons. Let me try giving you an understanding of how much 80 to 100 million tons of food grain is. Way back in year 2000, and this problem was there even then, that we would not distribute grain free to our own hungry. In that year, the government was exporting rice, exporting food grain at rates lower than that at which we were selling it to our own poor and hungry population. Mind you, that grain was not of a quality that was going for human consumption in Europe. It was going as cattle feed. So we in fact made, we contributed to the fact that the European and American cows are the most food secure creatures on earth at the expense of the hunger of our own, at the expense of the hunger of our own populations. Now, at that time, Professor Jean Drèze made a calculation. There was almost 50 million tons there of food grain. He calculated, you put them in gunny sacks, right? So he made this calculation that if we take all our food grain sacks and lay them in a row, in a single row, it comes to about 1 million kilometers, which is more than 2 times the distance to the moon. On 50 million tons, if you laid out your food grain sacks, you crossed 1 million. I think the distance to the moon is about 340,000 kilometers, something like that. But you had enough to go to the moon and back to build a road to the moon and back on those 50 million tons. So what about 82 or 104 million tons, which we piled up? Maybe now we can build 2 roads, see? One, a super highway for the super rich, and one, a service lane dirt track for the migrants who will trudge on their feet to serve their masters there as well. There is something morally obscene about this to me. I cannot justify, rationalize it in terms of any economics, in terms of any politics, in terms of anything. But that's who we are. And COVID shows us, the lockdown shows us who we are. Consider, I also find a very interesting debate amongst intellectuals and academics and activists about, there are two aspects to this debate. One is, how soon can we overcome this problem and return to normal? Another strand of it is, slightly more enlightened, but equally fallacious about, okay, now we are having a new normal. We got to adjust to the new normal. The problem is not about returning to normal. The problem is not about returning to normal. The normal was the problem. Remember that 50 million tons was piled up way back in 2000, year 2000, a year in which India declared a 63 million ton surplus, Pakistan declared a 4 million ton surplus, Sri Lanka a 2 million ton surplus, Bangladesh a 1 million ton surplus, and here we were, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, 70 million ton surplus and home to more than half the world's hungry. How do we How do we accept this? How do we justify that? That was your normal. Your new normal is that you can now build one superhighway and one service lane to the moon. Don't think normal for you and me is a very bizarre thing for those migrants who left their normal was horrible. That's why when you shut down the country at 4 hours notice, 100 and, a 1.3 billion people given a 4-hour notice to shut down, as the great former IAS officer G. Devasahayam put it. He used to be in the army before he went to the IAS and became, I think, among other things, chief secretary in one of the states. He's from Tamil Nadu. And he said, in the army, a small infantry brigade asked to go into action gets more than 4 hours notice. You asked 1,300 million human beings to shut down. You asked a nation of 1.3 billion to shut down in 4 hours. What was likely to be the result? Okay. Now, I want to go between this new normal, old normal for a bit with you. But I also want, I was trained as a historian and in Loyola College, in the history department where Bernard was my contemporary and classmate. I want to use a metaphor from medical practice because we are now dealing with a medical problem, right? Called COVID-19, a virus for which there is no vaccine yet. But there have been all kinds of medical practices, one of which works as an incredible metaphor for the other disciplines that we practice today. Way back, for more than 3,000 years, bloodletting was a common medical practice. It originated around an idea from Hippocrates and was further sharpened by Galen. The idea was that the human, that our being was composed of 4 humors. The 4 humors of blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. An imbalance of these 4 humors was what led to illness. 500 years after Hippocrates, Galen took this much further when he declared that blood is the main humor. It was not equal priority, but blood was the main humor. And the physicians and surgeons and superstitions of the world and ancient world led to the practice of bloodletting to try and cure a patient by extracting vast quantities of bad blood. You may not know this, but this practice was pretty prevalent. It was most popular in Europe in the Middle Ages. And right up to the 19th century, it went on quite heartily. Charles II of England died when his doctors took out 24 ounces of his blood in order to cure him. George Washington had 3 doctors who kept bloodletting until the poor man did not die. To cure him, but it was the illness that won, no doubt due to the fact that the patient was so weak from loss of blood. He died. In the ancient methods, right up to the 19th century, leeches were used for bloodletting. In fact, the medical leech, the medicinal leech, Hirudo medicinalis, was used. We will never to draw blood. This is discredited only in the late 19th century. We will never know how many human beings lost their lives to the medico-ideological delusions of their doctors. We'll never know that. There's no count. But please notice that while this practice dies out in the late 19th century, the ideological moorings of this practice are firmly implanted and still dominant in the fields of economics, business, philosophy, and society, right? Uh, it's the bloodletting approach. How do you cure people? By austerity, by imposing austerity, by shock and awe treatment, by structural adjustment, which in some cases was near genocidal. So the medieval mindset of bloodletting still dominates the discipline of market economics. We really need to understand that. And now to COVID. What does COVID-19 do? COVID-19 has performed, COVID-19 has given us a brilliant, complete, thorough autopsy, a brilliant and thorough autopsy of the economics and society we have and of capitalism itself. The corpse is on the table. In glaring light, every vein, artery, organ, and bone staring us in the face. You can see all the leeches. Privatization, corporate globalization, extreme concentration of wealth, levels of inequality unseen in living memory. The bloodletting approach to social and economic life that has seen societies drain working people of the basics of decent and dignified human existence. Some of the most powerful of social and economic doctors around the corpse before us analyze it much the way the doctors of medieval Europe did. As my old late friend Alexander Coburn once said, where he was speculating that when the doctors of the Middle Ages lost their patient, they probably shook their heads sadly and said, "We didn't bleed him enough." Precisely as the World Bank and the IMF have whined for decades that the horrific damage their shock and awe treatment of sometimes near genocidal structural adjustment was not because their reforms went too far, but because their reforms did not go far enough, were not allowed by people to go far enough. Also, we have had the ideologically insane argue right up to the start of COVID that inequality isn't a bad thing and it isn't such a great thing. That oracle of Delphi of the conservative economist, the Economist magazine, 30 days before January 2020, had its cover story, Inequality Illusions, and said those gaps are nowhere as great as they appear to be. And in fact, dismissed all the talk of inequality as somewhat of nonsense. COVID-19 completely trashed this mindset, this thinking, but they remain in power, they remain dominant. Inequality, as we know, is central to any debate we have on COVID-19, on the lockdown, on the impact of people, because whatever people say, COVID-19 is not a leveler. It's a surgeon that's done the autopsy. It's not a leveler, as one Indian doctor in the UK health system has put it. The greatest the greatest vaccine to COVID-19 is wealth. If you are rich enough, you can wall yourself off. Yeah. So for years now, ruling elites have been savaging the suggestion that inequality has anything to do with humanity's problems. Early this millennium, Brookings Institute argued we should abandon this debilitating discussion on inequality. And of course, I told you about the oracle of Delphi called The Economist, which read the chicken and lamb entrails before it and did a cover story saying inequality is all rubbish. The inequality is all rubbish sounds to me like one day it could be recorded as the most famous last words since Tarzan groaned, "Who greased the bloody grapevine?" That would be the most famous last words. Now, here's the thing. Look at inequality post-COVID. Yeah, as I'm saying, the problem is not returning to normal. Normal was the problem. The pro-COVID normal, in January 2020, we learned from Oxfam that the 22 richest men in the world had more wealth than all the women in Africa. That the world's 2,153 billionaires held more wealth than 60% of the world's population. Now, what's the new normal? In the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, American billionaires added more wealth in the 3 weeks than the total wealth they held in 1990. In 1990, the total wealth of American billionaires was 240 billion. In 3 weeks of the pandemic, they added 282 billion, and it's somewhere like 1.87 trillion or some such obscene figure now. Even the day before yesterday, we read that Mr. Jeff Bezos of Amazon made $8 billion in a week. So this, a normal is where we had, today, I'm looking at the latest figures, we had last week 91 million tons of food grain stocked in our godowns and open yards. The new normal, the government, far from distributing grain on a gigantic scale, on an emergency footing, has given permission, the cabinet has actually given permission to sanction conversion of huge stocks of the food grain into ethanol to make hand sanitizer. Now, by the way, 60% of households in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Odisha, 60% of rural households have no access to water and soap. Yeah, you're going to give them ethanol. You're going to give them hand sanitizer from ethanol. The logic of destroying food to create ethanol when there is rampant hunger in the country, I just wish somebody would explain this logic to us, because the Prime Minister has never cared to do that in the many speeches he's made to the nation. By the way, the southern states, Bernard, the southern states are going to be the worst affected, because which grain, southern and eastern states, because which grain gets converted into ethanol? Rice. It is the rice stalks that get converted into ethanol. As far as I can find, there has been no cap on the amount permitted to be converted. And of course, you will also blend it with fuel. So the old normal, the new normal, 50 million tons, 100 million tons, the old normal. Now look at the countryside. Please know this, that nobody has a clue. We do not have a clue on the actual numbers of migrants. Okay, because the Census of India, which is a wonderful document, and I embrace it as a grand and wonderful document, it is not geared to counting the kind of migrations that began in a much bigger way post 91, 92 when we embraced our new economic reforms. Categories of migrants like footloose migrants don't get counted. People who have no clear destination, who do not know where they will be 3 months from now, they are not captured in the studies of the census and the NSS. We do not know, because our media have never bothered to cover rural India and poor people, how many classes of migrants there are. There are long-term migrants like me. I'm from Chennai. My father was from Kakinada in Andhra Pradesh. I studied in higher education after Loyola in JNU Delhi, and I'm living in Mumbai for 37 years now. Yeah, but I belong to a class of migrants that had social capital and class and caste networks. Wherever I went, I improved my situation. That is not the case with 95% of India's migrants. Yeah. There are uh, seasonal migrants, long-term migrants, short-term and circular migrations. There are footloose migrations. We have no knowledge of this because we've never, I mean, we do at PARI. We cover migrants around the year, not just, we didn't realize that they exist on March 25th. Yeah. But we have no knowledge of our society, and a generation or two are growing up as foreigners in their own country. Yeah. So we have no knowledge of this because we never, it didn't matter to us. They were doing, as long as they were doing our work properly. Now, when they start going back and we are finding that ourselves at a great, one of the wonderful things about the lockdown is that when we look at essential services and we try to define essential services, we find that the elites and the middle classes are so completely inessential to anything. It is the very poor and the marginalized who are your essentials, okay? Your ASHA workers, your sanitation workers, most of whom are Dalits, it is not those, these are your frontline warriors in this so-called war, which I think is a bad analogy, by the way. But this is the thing. Now, as these people start going back, we are asking this question, why are they leaving? Will they come back? Wrong question. Your question should have been, why did they leave the villages in the first place to come here? People who were proud farmers, landowners, coming and working in our homes as domestic servants. What was it that drove them out of a livelihood and an existence which had greater stability? Our economic policies. We should have been asking why they came here in the first place. We didn't ask that because they were serving our needs and our services. Today, we are sending them back. I mean, they are going back to livelihoods that no longer exist because we have eliminated most of those livelihoods. The population of farmers fell by 15 million between 91 and 2011 census. So that's the state of the countryside, on which at least 20 million people are returning to. Over 10 million on just the Shramik trains of the government, which were introduced about a month and a week after the crisis began, by which time other millions had gone on foot. Now, what are they going back to? Where are the livelihoods? Where is the employment? After the initial surge of employment which comes because of the planting for the Kharif season, then where is the other employment? How do you do social distancing in the NREGA? None of these questions are a debate amongst us because we look at it from the completely selfish perspective of what was there in it for me. Now, I'm talking about the upper middle classes, the elite and the middle class and sections of the middle classes. Now, it's not just the migrants who are in great distress. Remember that those migrants were sending remittances worth billions and billions of rupees back to their villages, back to their farms, to their homes, to their families, to their parents. Now, suddenly, those remittances are gone, but the remitter is back. Where are you going to solve the problem of hunger in that family? Then, the whole family now sinks because there are no remittances from the person working outside. Plus, we never ever give credit to a simple thing like the handlooms and handicrafts industries in this country. Because most of us do not realize that handlooms and handicrafts are the second biggest employer in India after agriculture. Handicrafts and handlooms craftspersons are now on the edge of starvation, including your weavers of Kanjivaram and Arni, of Kanchipuram and Arni. Go and look at the condition of the weavers, as millions of orders have been cancelled across the country. Okay, so you're having a devastation of livelihoods which were already devastated for 30 years, and people returning to livelihoods that are not there. And that is the situation of impact in the countryside. Now, I want to take you through one of the great debates in the time that we have to one of the great wonderful things that's happening in the name of online education. You know, the leeches are on that corpse. Okay. Do you know that, say, the value of Byju's, for instance, has doubled in the last 12 months, mostly in the last 3-4 months. In July 2019, it was worth, its total market value was some $5.5 billion. Now it's, or yeah, something like that. And now it's $10.5 billion. In place after place. Now, universities, colleges, and I know I'm here because I have faith that the institution that I am an alumnus of, Loyola, will always keep the poor student in its focus. I'm satisfied with that. I know that. And that's why I so readily agreed to be here. Across the country, private universities and colleges are recalibrating their strategies. Now they can dump a lot of teachers. It's good for people like me who will be called on at freelance as freelance lecturers, and I'm being offered some fancy sums, okay, for that kind of thing, because they then don't have to, they can dump a number of full-time teachers and faculty and save on money and increase the profit on each rupee and dollar for their shareholders, right? Now, please understand what this excitement over this online education means for you. I'm going to share screen with you on some tables. This is the first of the tables that I'm going to share with you. You can see this one. Look, this table is percentage of persons of age 5 years and above with the ability to operate computer for different states. Let's take the mother of Silicon Valley in India, Karnataka. Okay? Percentage of persons of 5 years age and above with the ability to operate computer for different states. Karnataka is home to Bangalore, which is Silicon Valley too. Please look, 12% of rural males, 12% of rural males have the ability to operate computers in rural Karnataka, which population is 37, 38 million. 1 in 14 women can operate a computer in rural Karnataka. All told, 1 in 10 rural people in Karnataka, population 38 million, rural Karnataka, can operate computers. Tamil Nadu is much better than Karnataka, but still, look at it. Just 15% of women in rural Tamil Nadu have the ability to operate a computer. They don't necessarily have computers. Let's look at percentage of households with computer and internet facility for different states. Let's look at our Silicon Valley, mother of Silicon Valley, Karnataka. 2% of households in Karnataka have computers. 8.3% have internet facility. I repeat, 2% of rural households in Karnataka have computers. 8.3% of rural households in Karnataka have an internet facility, which is worse than Uttar Pradesh, which has twice that percentage. 4% of rural households have computers and 11.6% have internet facility. By the way, that's also partly because of migrants, because those states are very high migration states. There is some, some network, some internet facility given to them. Tamil Nadu is 11.6% of households have computers, 14.4. Please look at it from the other point. 86% do not have an internet facility in rural Tamil Nadu. 11.6 have no 98% have no computers at home in their thing. You can look at it in terms of ability to use internet, Maharashtra, the richest state in the country, you know, 1 in 14, 1 in 15 women has the ability to use the internet. And let's not worry, let's not get into whether they have the network or not. But here's the point, friends. Uh, these are people who used internet during the last 30 days. All these figures are from the National Sample Survey 2018 75th round. Key indicators of household social consumption on education in India, June 2018. So these are the latest figures we have. These are the largest numbers we have. Very recently, the People's Archive of Rural India, we did a study. Uh, we did a study we did an article, an investigation from rural Maharashtra Adivasi areas, tribal areas. One, how many kids, we could not find children below the age of 15 who had a smartphone or a computer. You had to, the 11-year-old and 12-year-old had to beg and borrow from the neighbor, the father, if the father had a smartphone, or the elder brother who's working, and use that phone to download your lessons in PDF. Then the the package for the broadband, for the package for the 4G becomes much more expensive. They were paying 200 rupees a month for 2 GB a day, and as they started trying to download more, those who had the privilege of a phone, the cost kept going up. Okay. Then we found that in most cases, no children below the age of 14 had access to such a phone or had access to computers. Maybe it would be much better, as Kerala has done. And by the way, Kerala has the best figures by far, way ahead of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, way ahead of any other big state in the country on internet availability and on smartphone possession. But they have correctly noticed that television has a much better reach. So you've got to have a mix of how we are going to do this teaching, how we are going to do this instruction, and how we can even distribute material physically for the child to learn who has no access to any of these. Otherwise, we are moving, friends, from digital divide to digital partition. That's where we're going. It's a partition. We're drawing borders between those who have the privilege of internet access. Let me give you an example before COVID of Maharashtra, richest state in the country. Every year in the board exams, Bombay has very high pass percentages. Much larger numbers of students do much better. Very often, the topper comes from Vidarbha or Marathwada, but the pass percentages as a whole are very low. Why are they very low? Because children in those states, in those regions, have no electricity, and at the time of exams, we are having 12-hour and 15-hour power cuts. I live in Mumbai where there is not 1 minute's power cut before, during, or after exams. Many of the kids in Mumbai have access to internet and broadband at home. You know, this class divide, caste divide, gender divide, you've seen how bad access of women is. Those caste, class, gender divides, that digital divide, will now escalate into a digital partition. We need an entirely different approach. COVID-19, as I said, has given us an incredible autopsy of who we are, the society we are, the kind of society we are, what we are doing, the damage in food everywhere else, the damage in health and education. Now, I will point out to you that we are going historically in India, in historically a devastating path of defeat and despair. We are those medieval doctors who said, we didn't bleed the patient enough. So at a time when several European nations are trying to reconstruct their welfare states, which they discarded in the last 40 years, dismantled in the name of market economics. Spain and Ireland, in the first week of their lockdown, fully nationalized all medical resources, hospitals. Spain and Ireland are not socialist nations. They are not China. They are not Cuba. But they nationalized all their medical resources. In India, the fourth month of the lockdown, the state of Karnataka feebly begs the private sector healthcare system to dedicate 50% of beds to COVID patients. Now, Spain and Ireland, I know what they will do after the crisis. They will re-privatize it. They will nurse and nourish the private sector. But we haven't even done that. I will say that in favor of the Maharashtra state, in the very early days of the COVID pandemic, the state of Maharashtra requisitioned 80% of all beds in private hospitals. The kind of racketeering, blood-sucking, leeching that is going on, as many more people will be dying from non-COVID diseases. My old classmate in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, from my old school classmate, one of them died in this situation for inability to get medical treatment, which was not for COVID. Lots of people in the country have died. Lots of those migrants have died from dehydration. 91 people died on the trains alone, according to the Indian Railways. And that was a mid-May figure. Now, what we are, in fact, instead of learning the lessons of history, privatizing further. Yeah. In the middle of the pandemic, the government, Prime Minister holds a televised auction and privatization of coal blocks. For the first time in the 2 decades, the skies over Delhi are clear because hazardous industrial activity has come to a halt. Yeah. Climate change is something that you cannot fool around with, that you need to understand. Even progressive movements of farmers and laborers need to understand how important that issue is. But we are further privatizing. We've allowed the private sector in healthcare to run rampant, profiteering over so-called cures for COVID. And by the way, I live in Mumbai, in the vicinity, close proximity of 3 5-star hospitals, which are charging between 6,500 to 10,000 rupees for a COVID test, which doesn't cost 1,500 rupees. And which in India, you should simply make mandatorily free, right? No, but they are making huge quantities of money. And anyone who's ill and goes to a private hospital is immediately told there are no beds. Everything has been requisitioned by the government for COVID. And when you're leaving the hospital, and this has been the experience of many, when you're leaving the hospital, a tout who is linked to the hospital comes and tells you, I can get you a bed, sir. 2 lakhs it will take. 2 lakhs for so many, for 3 days or 4 days or whatever. 2 lakhs is the fee to get that bed. So you're having the leeches out in armies. Okay, your privatization, the neoliberal globalization, the economic policies we had, all these things have now come back to before us, laid bare before us in that autopsy on that table. We need, what can we do? Many things. One, worldwide, between nations, between first world, third world, one, I think you need cancellation of debt, complete cancellation of the third world debt. That is second, within nations, we need cancellation of the debt of what Khwaja Ahmad Abbas called the fourth world, the poorest of the poor in India, the fourth world. We need to dismantle corporate monopolies. We need to start by evicting them completely from health, education, and food and agriculture. We need movements to force states to a radical redistribution of resources, curbs on income at the top end, including by restoring and improving taxation systems that nations have steadily dismantled. Do you know that Bill Gates is much richer after he retired than when he was the big shot of Microsoft, because the United States has virtually dismantled corporate tax and wealth tax on the wealthy, super wealthy. They don't pay any tax. We need mass movements that compel countries to build nationwide universal systems in health and education. And let me tell you, that was the plan in India on the eve of independence. As we approach our 73rd anniversary of independence, let me point this out. You had the Gandhian Commission on Education, headed by Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, second president of India, and you had the Boer Commission, headed by Sir Arthur Boer of England, on health. One on education said, free India should never spend less than 10% of total expenditure on education. They didn't say spend 10%. They said never spend less than 10% on education. We never once honored this principle that was laid out for us by the founders of this nation and our constitution. The Boer Commission said India needed a fabulous large network of primary health centers, tertiary, secondary hospitals, district level hospitals. What did we do? In the last budget, this government has put even district level hospitals up for privatization or takeover by private management. We needed to build the kind of national health system that the United Kingdom built after World War II, before Mrs. Thatcher came along, and successive conservative governments in the UK dismantled the national health system, which, by the way, Boris Johnson admits publicly saved his life. And who was the nurse who saved his life? An immigrant. Okay. India has exported doctors and nurses all over the world with very few of our own. We did not build that national health system. We did not commit ourselves to it. We go around begging for extra beds from the private sector, which has been allowed to become billionaires overnight under COVID, in one sector after the other. Now, I'm saying this, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's food, whether it's agriculture, we need to build, and we need mass movements, because only people can do it, not charismatic individuals or leaders. We need to compel nation states to build nationwide universal systems in health and education. We need people's movements, and how we're going to do it. Forget those old idiotic cliches about paradigm of development. Forget this word, inclusive development, which to my mind was one of the more sophisticated leeches. We need to make our entire framework shift from whining and begging to movements for justice, food justice, like Kudumbashree in Kerala, health justice, like it has begun to come up in a small way. You will find in coming years that the idea and concept of health justice will grow, not of health insurance. Health insurance doesn't give you health. Okay, it doesn't. Yeah. And look at all the nonsense we have imbibed from our economists. We have accepted the idea that healthcare is something to be bought and sold and traded on the stock market. It isn't. It's a fundamental human right. Like education is a fundamental right of the child. Yeah. Already, whether it's food justice, health justice, some inspiring examples already exist, but they are marginal in corporate media coverage. We need, here and worldwide, to focus on the United Nations, some clauses of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, particularly clauses 23 to 28, the right to form and join trade unions, the right to work and equal pay for equal work, remuneration that ensures an existence of human dignity, of health, and a lot more. Instead of which, 5 states in this country have suspended 38 labor laws, have extended working hours from 8 hours to 12 hours. Three of those states, uh, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Gujarat, are not even paying overtime for those extra 4 hours. We have reneged on the gold standard of labor law in the world, which is the 8-hour day, more than 100 years old. So here I've given you very clearly some of those things we can do, and we need where. How do we coalesce around? What is the manifesto we coalesce around? I would say the directive principles of state policy of the Indian Constitution, which the Supreme Court has held 3 times in the last 40 years to be as important as the fundamental rights and duties. Um, for the past 25, 30 years, every Indian government has been in violation of the directive principles because of what they've done is the imposition of the market and the erasure of the moral. Yeah. The directive principles of state policy tell you it is the responsibility of the Indian state to fight and mitigate inequality. We practiced exactly the opposite with market economics. So we saw from 91 the imposition, we saw the imposition of the market, and the erasure of the moral. We need to look at the collective strength, the involvement of people. Even in the COVID pandemic, one state in this country is doing better than anyone else. Kerala is doing better than anyone else because the people of Kerala are involved in the local committees. There are networks of kitchens that have come up, 7,000 of them across the state of Kerala, to create food for. Where do those medical attendants go during their work day for lunch? They go to the Kudumbishri cafe. That's where they go. Everywhere in Kerala, you've been able to practice control, tracing, contacting much better because people are doing it. It's not imposed by police and federal troops and anywhere else. The people are involved in it. And the last 30 years of our development has been based on excluding people and running it on the tyranny of experts. But your constitution's founders were very clear on both principles which I'm talking about. Your constitution was very clear. How does it be? What does it say? Does it argue for a framework of market? No. It says justice and equality. Justice, social, economic, and political for all, beginning with social. And the Constitution doesn't say this will be done by experts or consultants. It says we the people. Okay, you're going to have to approach this in mass movements, not markets, not. We have a huge unfinished agenda, and we have to go back to that. A very legendary freedom fighter, Captain Bhau, Ramchandra Shripati Lad, one of the great underground freedom fighters, he turned 97 last month. And he told me, when I interviewed him, he pulled off the greatest train robbery in India's history when he and his P.Sainath attacked the train of the British Raj and lifted the payroll of the entire Bombay presidency and distributed it to starving peasants and laborers in 1943, year of the famine. He told me something very special, which I will end with. He said, when I was congratulating him on his role in the freedom struggle, because he is somebody, I cannot tell you how important he is to me. He corrected me when I spoke about the freedom movement. He said, Sainath ji, we fought for independence and freedom. We achieved independence. We fought for independence and freedom. We achieved independence. I will add to his words. As we approach the 73rd anniversary of that independence, it's worth fighting for that unfinished agenda of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Sainath, for capturing the reality of India from the day the pandemic hit India, capturing the plight of the farmers, the plight of the migrants, the plight of the weavers, and everyone you have captured. And first time, I think the audience being predominantly students, research scholars, and academics, you have also given us, the takeaways, what can be done. That also has been very special in your presentation today. Some of the questions that has come, I will place it before you, and you can respond. Maybe I will club 2-3 questions together which are similar.
Yeah.
Is the government unable to distribute the surplus food grains due to the inefficient machinery to disperse, or has no idea of people's misery, or doesn't know what to do? The next question also is similar to that. When an essential commodity is exported against it's a much a demand for domestic consumption, for export price must be and necessarily higher than its local market price. It shouldn't be otherwise. If no ration card with the migrant workers, how can it be guaranteed? How can we guarantee the food security? I think these are questions which are relating to the first part of your lecture. Maybe you can respond to this.
Yeah. Well, uh, is it the government? Is the government unable to distribute? Nonsense. It has every capability of distributing it very rapidly. And remember that I said it will be incredibly rapid if you involve people. As you go into your containment zone strategies, you need local committees. I'm saying this is what Kerala has done with relatively far greater success than anyone else. Now, why? The question is, my answer to your question is, the government and the Indian state are very capable of distributing the food grain. They are just distributing too little of it, and it's that 5 kilograms. Okay, you look at your household and see, if household of 5 people, and see how long, how many meals 5 kilograms of food grain lasts you. Now about the local market price and the you know about, is it the ration card? Yes, you're absolutely right that the export price must be higher, but that has not been the logic of the world, the economic logic that the world has followed in the last 30 to 40 years, when you export to where you get the best price, right? So, in fact, what has happened is that, remember that export, why did they not distribute it locally? Why were they charging locals more? Because under the new economic policy, the logic of the public distribution system underwent a transformation. Those of you who are from Kerala will be interested to know that the public distribution system drew its inspiration and has its origins in a popular movement in Kerala, especially in Malabar and northern Kerala, during the Malabar famine in the 1900s. A lot of little groups, producer consumer cooperatives, came up and started this fair price distribution system. After World War II and after the Bengal famine, a system inspired by that example of ordinary people Some of your greatest leaders of Kerala came out of that movement, and or participated in it. And the entire idea of the public distribution system came up, one, with the memories of famine, and therefore we need emergency stock, and two, with the aim of moderating the market price. If food grain was getting more and more expensive on the market, then the idea was that the government would flood the market with the buffer stock and the prices would come down. This was the logic, the excellent logic of the public distribution system. Not good enough for me, but it worked for some years, for some decades. Then, once we get into the new economic policies, the public distribution system surpluses are not released to moderate the market price. They are held back. They are held back to keep the market price up, to ensure that the market price is higher. UPA government and the NDA government have both spoken in hushed tones of we should not distort market prices. And that has been the argument, by the way, for not giving farmers a higher minimum support price. The present government of India came to power in 2014, arguing that it would implement, promising it would implement the Swaminathan Commission report on MSP, which would be equal to COP2 plus 50%, full cost of production plus 50%. Within 12 months of coming in, it submitted an affidavit to the Supreme Court saying, we can't do that, it would distort market prices. Okay. So you are using that 84 million tons to shore up the prices in the market, not using it to moderate those prices. The logic of economics changed. The public distribution system, the buffer became a leech. That's what it did. It's how we are using that system, the economics that we are following, the bloodletting economics of the market. So the third thing, in answer to both your questions, please notice how ridiculous has proved your Aadhaar system. It didn't do a damn thing for you in this crisis. Nothing. You should have been able, you needed to distribute food grain regardless of whether anyone had a card, it had no ration card, had Aadhaar, didn't have Aadhaar. You haven't done that. You've excluded 30% of the nation. The UPA government did that in the National Food Security Act. And now you're not willing to give those people, hungry people, grain, though you've got 91 million tons, by the way, the latest figure. Yeah.
Another set of questions, Sainath, are do you feel that we, like Spain and Ireland, have to nationalize the medical sector until the pandemic withers away in our country? Is it possible in our country with a federal structure? Can we do that? Another one is on still we lack the infrastructure in rural areas. If moving digital post-COVID era education aspects, where are we concentrating to improve our higher education system?
Okay.
Since the 1990s, India has been completely corporatized. I want to know, how will you convince this government to stop all this? And the last one for this, the food grains into sanitizers, no cash incentives and wage subsidy to migrant laborers and marginal farmers. The government is so insensitive.
Okay.
Over to you.
Yeah. I find it fantastic that we can think, Spain and Ireland can do it, but can India do it? Okay. India is much socially, culturally, politically to the left of the European nations. Okay? And in India, damn it, it's in your constitution. Those are the rights of the Indian people. Those are the directive principles of the constitution. What we are saying Spain and Ireland can do, but we cannot do. Should we? Absolutely. But I differ on one. I entirely agree with you if you're saying we should do what they did. But but there is a point of departure. You said until the crisis is over.
Mm.
I'm saying no. I want I want to evict corporations from the health, education, food and agriculture sections. Yeah, because we have no idea of the kind of food crisis and health crisis that is coming up. Do you think this is the last pandemic? Do you think this is the last such crisis you're going to face? Then I think we are very mistaken. And I'll tell you what Spain and Ireland are going to do. They're going to do what Sweden did when it had a banking crisis and a market crisis. In 91, faced with a collapse and a market collapse, Sweden nationalized all her banks. She nationalized them, she wet nursed them, nourished them, nurtured them on public funds, and when they were viable again, returned them to private ownership. This man, I am not wanting that to happen. And I'm very sure Spain and Ireland are going to do precisely that at some point. Okay. I am saying immediately you nationalize those resources. That's one step. But you also make a commitment, like in the Bore Commission, like in the Gandhian Commission. You make a commitment to building gigantic national structures of education, that meaning a central commitment of education to education and health. And please, what federal structure? We destroyed that federal structure the day we accepted GST. Most states, the main tax, the main source of revenue that states had was sales tax, and the municipalities had octroi. You get into a GST system, you set back federalism by 60 years, all the income, all the monies flow to the center, and the states are begging for their own money. Please, Maharashtra says you owe us 17,000 crores, now 20,000 crores under GST. It's the money of the state which the center is not allocating. I'm saying we need legislation that sets you will not spend less than 10% of total expenditure on education. You will not spend less than so many percent on health. You will build a national health system. And yes, you will have federalism when the states have, you need federalism where the states have control over their own resources. Okay. Tamil Nadu was one of the pioneering states in the fight for state rights, from the time of Annadurai. And Tamil Nadu, Jyoti Basu of West Bengal, these people moved towards that issue of state rights. Federalism grew for 30, 40 years. And then one wave of the legislation, and many political parties supported it. The states gave up their rights to the center, who will now decide on distribution. So federalism is a process that you need to restore, and you need to build. You need to compel the center to build a national health system and a national system for education, which, by the way, look at already the caste system operates. Who goes to the private schools and who goes to the government schools? There are exceptions like my old alma mater, but those are precisely that, they're exceptions. The second thing is about the infrastructure. What infrastructure? Yeah, while we destroyed the rural infrastructure, while we destroyed livelihoods in rural India, what were we planning in the cities? We were planning smart cities. The average smart city, there are 100 cities. Mr. Prime Minister declared we'll have 100 smart cities. The average smart city would serve about 3% of the existing population of that city. In Indore, 2.8%. 2.8% of the existing population. First, they were recognizing, if you look at their plans, that the existing infrastructure in the cities does not is not capable of serving even 25% of the population. Yeah. So what did we do? We didn't build infrastructure. We built Shangri-Las and Valhallas and Xanadus like Amravati or the smart cities elsewhere, which exclude people and which exclude the millions of people who were coming in, whom we drove out of the countryside. They were coming in. They have no access to the infrastructure of the city. They live in slums. Tamil Nadu already tried this in Chennai, when you took people who had lived generations in the slums of Tamil Nadu and evicted them to Kannagi Nagar. That's what you did. Okay? Where, what infrastructure? The infrastructure is for, they have made a categorical statement by the smart cities are a categorical statement that the infrastructure we build will serve 3% of the existing population of the city. So you need a different kind of development. I'm saying, don't think you can tackle this problem by going back and correcting a few errors. Tinkering will not work for you. It's not tinkering you need a transformation. You need an entirely different framework, and that framework is the framework of justice. The rights that people have to food, to health, to agriculture, to land. And corporations, how will you dislodge corporations? You know, I sense a certain defeatism in this, that corporations cannot be defeated. Historically, countries like the United States themselves have been forced, and if it's happening in the last 5 years, they were forced to tame corporate power. In 1912, in way back in, I think, 1912, when the House of Rockefeller was becoming more important than the White House, the United States government acted to break Standard Oil into 7 sisters. They broke monopolies. Okay? In the 1940s, they broke monopolies with antitrust legislation in Hollywood to see that people could not control filmmaking, production, distribution, and theaters could not be controlled by the same people. So you created ownership restrictions. There are many such ownership restrictions we need to create cross ownership restrictions in the Indian media, which is now incredibly monopolized. Okay? The richest man, Indian in the world, who is the 5th richest man in the world, is also the biggest owner of media in this country. There are no anti-monopoly laws in the media of India, though there are in the United States and Europe. And by the way, Europe has been fining Google, fining Facebook, and Microsoft, billions of dollars in unpaid taxes. The wealth of the billionaires came from them not paying any taxes at all. That's how they grew. And in the first 3 weeks of pandemic, they earned more than they held totally in 1990. You cannot do a damn thing if you are not willing to confront and tame corporate power, whether in media, whether in health, whether in other sectors. Now, the whole idea of food grain and sanitizer, it's too bizarre. Oh, by the way, all over the world in the last 30 years, there have been large anti-corporate movements. It's not as if they don't exist or that we have to create them from scratch. We just have to look at our own folly in having accepted the ongoing consolidation of a corporate state. And when we fight that, we are fighting to defend our constitution, which says we are a state of we the people. You know, Instead of which, as my friend Ashok Rao says, in the last 25 years, India has moved from self-reliance to reliance. Okay, so you undo that. You have a situation when that was not the case. Why is it so? Why does it look so impossible and distant a dream? It can happen. It will not be easy, but it can be done.
There are other questions too, Sainath. Keeping in mind the time, I will present it to you, but you can take, you can have your choice. A movement of people from rural to urban and from farm to non-farm sector, it fueled urbanization and growth. Will this change? Will this change during the new normal? Private sector has stayed away from rural India or lacks capacity to come up with profitable business models to operate in rural India. Can government consider any strategy to increase rural-based economic growth? Global capital flows to cities. The online marketplaces attracting much of these investments like Biju. What is the possible in rural India? So those are the questions.
Okay. I really would like people to understand that the movement of human beings and migrations are not just rural to urban. Please understand this. The census also shows you that there are gigantic movements of migration of rural to rural. In Tamil Nadu, every season, every dry season, tens of thousands of people move from Pudukkottai to Tanjavur to make bricks. Tanjavur is the richest rural district in the country, in Tamil Nadu. People move there, then the same poor of Pudukkottai go to another part of Tanjavur in another season for sowing or harvesting or whatever. There are tens and tens of millions of Indians in the villages who at the time of harvest or sowing go to find work in other villages, in other districts, and sometimes in other states. So a lot of migrations are not just, see, when middle class people like us talk of migrations, we think of someone leaving a village in Kalahandi and coming to Chennai or Mumbai or Delhi. That is one stream of migration. That is village to urban metro. Second, that's not a one-stop journey. That person may work 5 years in different places before he arrives in Chennai or she arrives in Chennai. Second, there is the rural to small town migration. Third, the rural to rural migration. Fourth, urban to urban migration is also a significant phenomenon. And lastly, there is a small trend of urban to rural, and Tamil Nadu gives you the example of Tirupur, where even a section of Chennai's working class from Padi and Ambattur went off to Tirupur when the government gave it some infrastructure, gave some incentives to create it. So invested more in the countryside, and you had Tirupur becoming some sort of a, which is in serious trouble now. Okay, but that's one. Second, the private sector is not able to come up with good business. I don't know this. This is not my experience. I think the corporate sector, as different from the private sector, which, I mean, farming is a private sector, okay? Farms are not owned by the state or the public, they're owned by private individuals. But the corporate sector has made gigantic profits out of the countryside. They've made gigantic profits out of, just say, agribusiness has made how many billions of dollars in India from the sale of cotton seed? Please think about it. Yeah, while we have destroyed the public sector in agriculture, we have destroyed our own seed producers, our own agricultural universities. We produce all those seeds under license of two or three companies that controls 60-70% of the seed market in the world. Oh, people are making incredible profits. The wrong people are making that profit. The bleeding of the countryside has been on for 30 years. Okay? So it's not as if there is no money that they don't have a revenue model. They have a revenue model, and it's called loot, grab it, and run. That is the revenue model. Hmm? The global capital flows to the cities and Baijus, and I'm saying this, that education and health for me are A, universal human rights, B, rights of Indian citizens under their constitutions. I am not interested in furthering the wealth of someone who has doubled from 5.5 billion to 10.5 billion dollars in 12 months, particularly in light of the pandemic. I am interested in investing in public investment in education for the hundreds of millions of children who will be totally excluded from this game. Yeah, this is commerce. It's not education. This is commerce. I have no interest in it except to curb it. Yeah. I also, I want to tell you something, that if you want to know about this, if you want to know about the People's Archive of Rural India is trying, in a few days, we will be launching called a section of ours called PARI Education. And by the way, several Jesuit schools and colleges are participating, including St. Joseph's and others. This is PARI. The URL is Rural India Online, one word, ruralindiaonline.org. We publish in 13 languages, including 12 Indian languages. And we are opening a section where students themselves will write debate issues, contribute articles, etc. But the rest of PARI is the education process as well, right? In terms of, you can look at, we are now being used in the curriculum of more than 30 colleges across this country for teaching. Teachers have worked us into their curriculum. And if you go to PARI, you will find thousands of articles translated into all those languages. Yeah. So a Tamil speaker who is weak in English can read the article in Tamil and improve his or her English by reading the same article in English. The vice versa is also true. An English speaker who is Tamil is poor can strengthen himself in one or more languages. Right. Now, please know that this is free. There is no subscription fee. We are not selling products to children. There are no advertisements on our website. We proceed on our revenue model is your idealism. Whether you think we are performing a service in a country where a generation is growing up as foreigners in their own nation, yeah, where they don't know a thing outside Chennai, where they have no idea how people live in Ramnad or Tirunelveli. They have no idea how people live in these places. I think it's an extremely dangerous thing for their education and for democracy. So please look at the People's Archive of Rural India. You will I have to tell you, just a few days ago, we carried an article, especially since we are coming up to Independence Day in less than a month. We are doing a series on the last living freedom fighters of India. Bernard, I hope you will invite him to Loyola College. 99 years old and fit as a fiddle, N. Sankaraya of Chennai, who never completed his degree in American college, top student, because he was imprisoned by the British 15 days before his final exams in March 1941, after which he spent the rest of his life in jail, much of his life in jail for the next 30 years. Okay, right up to 60s when he was imprisoned during the India-China conflict and various other issues. I think that there is an inspiration to be gained from such human beings who fought for your freedom and independence. As Captain Bow said, we attained independence, not freedom. I think that you will find that PARI is an incredible teaching resource, learning resource. It's a resource for teachers as much as it is for students. And you will find we have done so far 110 articles and documents under COVID and on the lockdown's impact on livelihoods. That's where I'm giving you all those facts and figures from. Yeah, we've done 110 exclusive at a time when other media groups are sacking thousands of journalists. They have shed, Ananda Vikatan has sacked 175 journalists, Hindustan Times 180. At a time when people need journalism most, the corporate media are shedding journalists. Yeah, we bring you those stories from 35 regions of this country, including Tamil Nadu, and how Tamil Nadu people in the countryside are coping with the lockdown. Please, please get to know People's Archive of Rural India. It's free. It's yours to use for teaching, for learning, for educational purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sainath. Extremely grateful to you. Uh, I'm 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 aware that your hands are full. You have teaching assignments, you have writing assignments, and the schedule is full. But in spite of that, you decided when we requested that you would give time and speak to us. And I think your presentation has been definitely, it would have given a very, very, very strong message to the youngsters, as most of them are students and researchers. I'm sure that this is going to make a great impact, and by combining their work with the PARI, People's Archive of Rural India, there is nothing like knowing your own rural areas and reporting from rural areas, which the mainstream media is not doing. And in that way, you have done a great work and a great contribution. Thank you very much from our side. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Father Principal, who has been, his heart has been always on rural India. His own postdoctoral research, it was on rural India and marginal farmers. And he was very keen that Sainath should speak to to a larger audience. And so thank you, Father, and thank you. The technical team has worked really well, headed by with Dr. Xavier Raj, Mr. Samson, Mr. Peter, Mr. Ahilan, and Victor. They all have worked really well, to get all the feedback and questions and comments and put them together. And that is the reason why we were able to present it effectively to Mr. Sainath and to all the participants. Overwhelming response for Sainath's lecture. And I myself could not believe that from all over India and abroad, people have registered for this lecture. I'm sure that they all benefited and they all carry with them, each one, some takeaways from Sainath's presentation today. With these words, I would also like to invite the participants. It is not a series of lectures, but it is a coincidence that we have also a lecture tomorrow lined up, and where the Finance Minister of Kerala, Sainath, has been cited Kerala as a model. And tomorrow we were able to get Thomas Isaac, the Finance Minister of Kerala, to speak to us on the challenges of the post-COVID economy, and join us at 6 o'clock for his presentation. And with these words, I would like to thank every one of you for joining us for this online special lecture by Sainath. And once again, Sainath, thank you very much, and looking forward to meet you soon after the COVID, sometime in Chennai. Thank you.
Thank you.